Good evening and welcome to the second evening of our CIR concussion series. I would like to take this time to thank PIA Law, sponsor of this incredible series, and the platinum sponsors at BIST. This evening, I would like to welcome Brianna, who will be joining us representing the PIA. Brianna started at Oatley-Vigmond as a summer student in return for articling. She joined the firm as an associate in 2021. Brianna holds a Juris Doctor from Western University Faculty of Law, an honors BA in English Literature with distinction from the University of Toronto. Brianna is devoted to advocating for clients so they can focus on rebuilding their lives. She has seen firsthand the profound impact an injury can have on the victim and their families, and believes that navigating a complex legal system should be the least of their worries. Effective communication, compassion, and commitment are the cornerstones of Brianna's practice. In her spare time, Brianna enjoys reading, hiking, canoeing, and spending time with her family. Brianna is currently learning American Sign Language. Prior to joining Oatley-Vigmond, Brianna gained experience volunteering with the Community Legal Services and Immigration Services at Western Law. While at Western, she also worked as an editor, managing editor, deputy editor-in-chief for the Western Journal of Legal Studies. Brianna is a member of the Ontario Trial Lawyers Association and Young Women in Law. Welcome, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a wonderful introduction. And now it's my turn to introduce Ayushi Dhingra. Ayushi has been working at Complex Injury Rehab since 2016. She's been providing occupational therapy services for children, adults, and older adults with acute and chronic illnesses, such as orthopedic injuries, musculoskeletal conditions, traumatic brain injuries, and mental health conditions. Ayushi has a special focus on children and adults following concussion and acquired brain injuries. She has completed the Ontario Brain Injury Association Level 1 and 2 courses in neurorehabilitation following brain injury, as well as several concussion management workshops and seminars throughout her career. Ayushi works collaboratively with her clients and treatment teams to ensure that the whole person is being treated.
Thank you, Rihanna. Nice to be here with everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today on this lovely Monday evening. I don't know if people got outside at all. It was quite sunny today. And actually, because we're talking about fatigue management, vitamin D, getting vitamin D from the sunlight can actually be pretty helpful for managing fatigue. But so going off of that, the topic for today, I'm hoping to give you some information on fatigue and fatigue management and some strategies that you can start incorporating to help combat ongoing fatigue post-concussion. Just to give some background on me as an occupational therapist. I don't know if people here, if you've worked with an OT before, but really as an occupational therapist, what we look at is all the activities that occupy your life. And so after you've had an injury, so for today's discussion, we're talking about concussion after an acquired brain injury, a lot of those activities that you were doing pre-concussion have probably been disrupted in some way. And a big barrier to you participating in those activities might be fatigue. So as an OT, what I would be looking at is helping clients pace their days so that they can help manage their fatigue throughout the day and participate in the activities that they want to participate in within their abilities and within their tolerances. So the focus for today is looking at fatigue as the symptom, which is quite prevalent after concussion, and how you can manage your days better to help overcome that fatigue and still participate in the things that you need to be doing or want to be doing. So just to give you a bit of an outline for today, I'm going to go over exactly what is fatigue, we're all, somewhat familiar with what it is. Everybody experiences fatigue to some degree, but after concussion, it's slightly different. So we'll go over that, and we'll also go over the different types of fatigue and the factors that play into um, your fatigue levels. We'll also look at some activity patterns, some common activity patterns that I see with clients, and what the sort of target goal should be with how we're pacing and planning our activities and what that pattern would look like. And then we'll go into actually managing fatigue, and we'll go over the 4 P's of energy conservation, which is just another way of saying fatigue management, essentially. And we'll also talk about sleep hygiene, which is a huge factor in helping you manage your fatigue. And a lot of the information that I'll be presenting with you today has been taken from the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation. They have their clinical guidelines set out, which is pretty much all evidence-based practices for assessing and managing concussion. And so in their guidelines, there is a whole section on fatigue that they have outlined for how to manage it using evidence-based practices. So let's talk about what fatigue is. So it's essentially that sort of sense of weariness or tiredness after a period of mental or physical exertion. Now, the thing with concussion is that there's this sort of disproportionate level of fatigue that you might feel after participating in an activity that before your concussion really wouldn't have caused you that much exhaustion. So something like, reading for 20 minutes before your concussion was no problem, or you were able to do it for hours. But now after your concussion, it causes this sense of tiredness after maybe 10, 15 minutes. So the key thing here with post-concussion fatigue is that sense of weariness and tiredness, but it's disproportionate to what you're used to. And so this fatigue often, results in a reduced capacity to work and to respond to stimuli efficiently. And it is one of the most persistent symptoms of concussion. So it's one of those that actually can still be present up to 5 years post-injury. And if you've been experiencing fatigue 3 months post-injury, it is likely that you'll experience it beyond the 6-month mark as well. Now, the frustrating thing about fatigue, and one of the reasons it can become quite persistent, is because it creates this sort of ongoing cycle. And what I mean by that is after concussion, people will often feel that fatigue, but that will often result, or you might already start with having poor coping and problem solving skills, which can then result in an increased level of stress, because maybe your poor coping skills are impacting your work or your school or your relationships with others. And so this causes this extra amount of stress, which, as we also know, is a big precursor to depression or going through depressive episodes. And the thing with depression is that one of the symptoms of depression is fatigue. So you're not only experiencing fatigue now from a depressive episode, but it's further exacerbating the fatigue you were already feeling from the concussion. So it has this sort of dual effect of just complete exhaustion, which then, of course, goes back to the cycle of having poor coping and problem solving skills, further increasing your stress, further causing you into the state of depression. And so it's this vicious cycle. And this is one of the reasons how it can become quite persistent. Now, there are different types of fatigue as well. So physical fatigue is something I think the general population is familiar with. So this is that physical sort of tiredness that you would feel following a physical exertion. So this could be after a gym workout, or maybe after cleaning a house, or even just cleaning a room, raking the leaves, or doing a load of laundry. Now, going back to that sort of disproportionate level of fatigue after a concussion, you can think about maybe before your concussion, you were able to vacuum a single room in 10-15 minutes and you were completely fine. You can move on and clean the rest of the house. Versus now, post concussion, cleaning that one room or vacuuming that one room after 10 to 15 minutes, you're just completely wiped and you're exhausted and you need to take a break. And so that's that physical fatigue that kicks in. But there's also cognitive fatigue that you can also be experiencing, and this would be following a cognitively demanding task. And it could be, after you spent some time reading or watching a movie, or something even seemingly simple as either listening to a conversation or participating in a conversation, because that in itself can be quite cognitively demanding. As if you're on the phone with a friend and you're listening to them, you're processing what they're saying, you're reacting to what they're saying, you're trying to come up with a reply to them. That's a lot of different parts of your brain that are being activated at once, which can be quite draining on a brain that just experienced a concussion. So that's another type of fatigue. Now, there are a lot of factors to consider as well when you're thinking about your fatigue levels and why you might be experiencing a greater amount of fatigue. So medication is a big factor. So you want to think about, what medications you're on and which ones might have that side effect of increased drowsiness or sleepiness. Sleep is a huge factor, which is why we'll be talking about that later today. Not getting enough sleep or not getting enough good quality sleep would certainly impact your energy levels for the next day. Mood, like we touched on a little bit when we talked about depression or having a depressive episode, can certainly deplete your energy as well. Time of day is another factor to consider. So some people, they have the most energy at the beginning of the day and in the mornings. So that's when they might want to plan to do more of the cognitively or physically demanding tasks, because they know they have the most energy in the day. And some people, they're better later in the afternoon or in the evening. So it's a matter of figuring out what works best for you. And then there's also the environment in which you're completing a certain activity. So if we take reading, for example, there's a difference between reading something for 10 to 15 minutes in a quiet room versus reading that same book in a busy environment like a coffee shop where there's background chatter happening. Maybe there's some music playing, the coffee machines are running. So that's a lot of auditory stimulation, which again, your brain is picking up on, and it's depleting that energy that you had from a cognitive perspective. So it's important to think about your environment as well. If you need to get through a book and you only have 30 minutes, probably best to do it in a quiet room versus grabbing a cup of coffee and finishing it there. The important thing here to remember, though, is that everybody has different tolerances and everybody has different triggers. So it's important to be aware of what those are for you, and building that self-awareness as you carry on with your day, or working with someone who knows you well or with a therapist to help you identify those tolerances and triggers, and then help you plan out your activities accordingly, which we'll get to as well. Now, I wanted to put this up because, like I said, everybody has different tolerances, but one thing that often remains the same is everybody tends to push beyond their tolerances. And this is something I've heard verbatim from clients, thoughts that they've expressed to me that then lead them to pushing beyond their limits. So, they'll say things like, I used to be able to do all this, or I just need to push myself more, or I don't want to let other people down. And this is often what I see with parents, who have kids that they need to take care of. And during the pandemic, it was especially hard as they were taking on multiple roles. But that's, another thought that comes to mind. And I've also heard some clients say, thinking about what other people will think about them. They'll think I'm lazy or because I'm already not doing much. And so these are all very common thoughts to have, especially, if you feel like such a completely different person after your concussion. And it's hard because if before your concussion you were a go-getter and you were able to do everything and all at once, it's hard to go from that to really taking the time to pace yourself and take those breaks and plan out your activities in a way that you can do them within your abilities and within your tolerances. But it's hard because that in itself is a habit that you have to kind of get used to, at least temporarily, as you build your tolerances. So what happens then as you push beyond your limits is this. So let me just walk you through this graph or this visual that I see happen a lot with clients. So this was developed by the Parkwood Institute, which is an outpatient acquired brain injury program out of St. Joe's in London, Ontario. And so they put together this sort of visual to show clients what are some activity patterns that they've seen and activity patterns that we want to see that we'll see on the next slide. So this is often what happens with clients. So just to walk you through this, at the bottom on the x-axis, we have time passing by. And then on the y-axis here, we have intensity. So the intensity level of the actual activity that they're participating in. So let's say, you're at the beginning of the day, you have a lot of energy and you have some kind of report to get through, whether it's for school or for work. So you start working on the report and you go beyond that symptom onset threshold where you start to experience some kind of symptoms. So in this case, let's say it's a headache. So you get to this sort of yellow area where you're experiencing mild to moderate level of symptoms. And it's a headache, and it's a 4 out of 10 kind of headache. But you really need to get this report done, and you need to keep working on it. There's a deadline, so you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, and then you get to a point where you're at a 10 out of 10, and maybe not even 10 out of 10, maybe 11 out of 10, 12 out of 10. I've had clients go beyond that because it's just too important to let go, and they get to that stage in the red zone where they're now in significant symptoms. And at that point, they just can't take it anymore and they crash and they burn and they go through this long recovery period where they need to rest and recharge. So they do that, and that's great. And then they start to feel better. So they go back to the report and they cross that symptom onset threshold and start to feel that headache. But it's okay, I can push through it. I'm going to keep pushing through it. And they do. And then they get to that headache. They're at a 15 out of 10, but that's okay until it gets worse. And then they just crash and burn again. Right. And then this is just an ongoing cycle. This is what keeps happening. And you end up seeing that you're spending more time actually in the recovery period resting than actually participating in the activity that you want to participate in. But this is very common, right? Because if we go back to this, these are the thoughts that are circulating and you just want to push through. Now, what we want to aim for, especially when you have these sort of persistent symptoms, is to engage in your activity, do whatever activity it is that you want to do, and spend time on it, and cross that symptom onset threshold and get to that. It's fine if you start to experience a headache or push yourself to the point where you experience the headache, but it's at that point when you want to actually take the break. And at this point, because it's not so significant, your break doesn't need to be as long. You can just take, some time to recharge, and then you can go back to the activity, push yourself beyond the symptom onset until you experience that sort of mild to moderate level, and then take your break again. And keep going with that cycle, because what your goal is, it's to gradually increase your activity tolerance without significantly increasing symptoms or crossing the symptom threshold into the red danger zone. So that's where planning and pacing of activities becomes really important. And you need to find the right level of activity whereby your symptoms are either eliminated or manageable. And then as your symptoms get better controlled, you can gradually increase your activity level in itself to the point that your activity pattern and your long-term goal will look more so like this. So you start off with a lot of energy, so you engage in the activity. And as you can see now here, the symptom onset threshold is much higher, which means you can push yourself more in terms of intensity level and participate longer in the activity before you do feel like you need to take a break. So you take your break, but at this point, you don't need to take that long of a break, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, and then go. And that's enough time for you to recharge, to be able to go back to the activity and engage for a longer period, and then take your break. So that's the way you'd want to sort of visualize your activity participation to get to this sort of long-term goal. Now, to do that, you would want to try these 4 P's of energy conservation. So we talked a bit about planning and pacing. We'll talk about it some more. But there are actually 4 P's, and we'll walk through them one at a time here. So the first one is to prioritize. So with prioritizing, you can think of it as, doing it on a daily basis, but also weekly basis, where you have a list of activities that you need to get through. And we all do this. We all make to-do lists. I have a to-do list from July that I still need to get through. I have items from my July list that I still haven't gotten to, but that's just how it goes. The important thing is that you make that list. The next step is to prioritize. So look at your list for the day and see, what is the most important thing that you need to make sure gets done for today. And try to limit yourself, again, depending on your tolerances, depending on how your day is looking like. Choose 1 or 2 things that you absolutely need to get done today. And then we'll get to the next stage where you plan out when you're going to do it. The other things you can note down that they can wait till tomorrow, they can wait till later in the week, they can wait till later in the month. But you want to try to prioritize those 1 or 2 things that you absolutely need to get done that day. And then which ones can be put off to a later date. So once you've prioritized that, then comes the planning stage. So you can look at, your week ahead and see how you want to plan out your activities throughout the week. Maybe you have a doctor's appointment coming that week, but you also have to go grocery shopping. So you want to plan it such that, you're not doing both of those things the same day if you know that that's going to tire you out. So that's one way of looking at planning, where you're planning throughout the week. You can also think of planning as planning an actual how you're going to plan an actual activity. So say it's Sunday and it's meal prep day. So within that activity of cooking, you want to plan it out such that you're avoiding any extra trips. And even if it's little trips, through the cupboards, you want to gather all your supplies, all your ingredients right from the beginning before you start, because that will just take off some of that cognitive load as you're going through the process of making your meals and following a recipe. Everything's there on the counter. Everything you need is right there. You just have to get it and work through it. The other thing you can think of is planning to alternate between heavy and light tasks, or between physically demanding tasks versus cognitively demanding tasks. because different demands would require different tolerances. And so maybe if you have that report to work on, you can work on that for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then you don't maybe necessarily need to take a break. Maybe you just need to take a brain break and you fold some laundry, which is more physical versus cognitive. And then you always want to plan to get a good rest each night, but especially the night before a busy day. And like I said, we'll talk about sleep some more because this is such a big factor in your energy levels throughout the day. So you always do want to plan to get a good rest each night. And the other way to plan is, I guess you can think of this more as delegating, where maybe you want to plan to get help from your friends or family to help complete certain tasks that you won't get to during that week. So that's another way you can look at planning. The other P is positioning. So this came up a lot because I have a lot of kids that I work with as well, post-concussion, post-brain injury. So during the pandemic, it was, the same old story of when they were doing their online learning, they would literally just roll out of bed right before 9 a.m. or right before their first class, log onto their laptop, and they're just laying down the whole time with their cameras off as they're participating in their Zoom class. And that was their day. And, I repeatedly had these conversations with them, how, in school, it's not like there are beds there, there are desks there, and there's a reason why it's good to sit up straight and upright when you're listening in class and when you're participating in class, because that in itself, just that upright posture helps get more oxygen to the lungs, helps get the blood going to your brain as well, to keep you alert and to keep you engaged. So when you're doing sort of, cognitively demanding tasks, it's good to try to sit upright, or you can try standing to help you with increasing that level of alertness as you complete that task. On the other end, though, it is still important to sit when you can, especially when you're doing physically demanding tasks, or even light tasks like folding laundry, or maybe when you're doing your makeup or getting dressed or doing your hair, getting a high stool for when you're doing your dishes, because sitting down can help reduce your energy by 25%. So that's another way to help conserve some energy throughout the day. And then the last P that we have here is pacing. So pacing, really, you want to think of it as maintaining a slow and steady pace as you engage in the activity that you're engaging in. You want to avoid rushing through a task because that will just create a greater sense of feeling overwhelmed and further depleting your energy reserves. You want to also implement frequent rest breaks. So often, when I work with clients and I help them schedule their day or schedule their week, I'll see, that they put in appointments and they put in work tasks or school tasks or things they need to do for their kids or for their parents. And that's all nicely laid out. But the one thing I always miss seeing is rest break and implementing an actual block of time for rest. And that's something that I always recommend to everybody when they're putting a schedule together, is to write down when you're going to take your rest break. Because if you don't write it down, or the day's just going to go by and you're going to realize you didn't take a break at all during the day. And that's a big reason as to why by the end of the day, you're just completely exhausted. So it's important, as you're figuring out your schedule for the week, to actually implement those rest breaks. And so, you can implement them, but obviously you have to listen to your body and be aware of your limits so that you know when to actually take a break. But it's also good to be proactive in slotting in time for when you'll take a break, especially after, you've slotted in time for an appointment or for engaging in some kind of cognitively demanding task, the natural sort of next thing to implement is the rest break right after that. And you can, also try to use a timer to help pace yourself and implementing those rest breaks. So you can set aside 20 minutes for reading, put on a timer for 20 minutes, read for those 20 minutes, timer goes off, and then set another timer for 10 minutes where you're taking a break, where maybe you go for a walk or you eat a snack, or where you take a proper rest break. So by that, I mean, there is a proper way to take a rest break, especially when you do need a lot of recharging, or maybe just like a quick recharge. So I put this picture up of a setting on your phone where you can put your phone on airplane mode. And I want to talk about how you want to put your brain on airplane mode when you take a rest break. So what I mean by that is going back to the phone. So I don't know if anybody's ever tried this, but if your phone is low on charge and you want a quick recharge because you're about to leave somewhere and your phone's about to die, but you really need to get a lot of charge in before you leave, a quick way to do that is to put your phone on airplane mode, because when you do that, there's no input coming in, no texts can come in, you can't get any phone calls, your Wi-Fi's off as well, and basically there's no input that can come in, and there's no stimuli for the phone there. And so because all of that is shut down, all of its energy can be put into recharging. And so maybe try that and see if that actually works with your phone. I know it's worked with my phone, where if you put on airplane mode, it will charge much faster than if you had your Wi-Fi on or had your data on. So going off of that, you want to put your brain on airplane mode in the sense that you don't want any input coming in when you take your break. You want to, by that I mean you want to block off all stimuli. So any visual stimuli, any auditory stimuli, you want to block all that off. So you want to go in a quiet environment. You want to close your eyes, maybe put an eye mask on if you need to. And you basically just want to block off everything to help you recharge faster. So this could be, a quick way for you to recharge before you engage in the next task and the next activity. But the important thing is that you specifically or make that conscious effort to block off all stimuli. So this kind of a break does not involve listening to music, because that's still stimuli coming in. That's still your brain processing a level of stimuli or that auditory stimuli. It doesn't include going for a walk, even though at times that can be deemed a break for some people. But if you want to take a proper rest break and really recharge, the best way to do that is to put your brain on airplane mode and block off all the stimuli. So, I mean, most importantly, though, you want to listen to your body. You want to stop and rest before you get too tired, or before you hit that red danger zone where you're experiencing significant symptoms. So you want to be proactive with your rest breaks, but you also you still want to push yourself beyond that symptom onset threshold and get still experience some mild to moderate level of symptoms, but you don't want to push yourself too much to the point where you have to just crash and burn and you end up sleeping for hours to help you recharge. Okay. So I want to switch over to sleep hygiene because sleep is a huge factor in so many things, not just fatigue, but also your cognitive functioning, your physical functioning, your mood. And so if you can, sleep is a big foundation that I work a lot on with clients because it can be such a precursor to, or not getting a good sleep can be a precursor to mood instability and not being able to concentrate and think properly, and also fatigue. And so following a proper sleep hygiene is a very sort of basic but foundational thing you can do to help with fatigue management. So when I talk about sleep hygiene, what I mean by that, it's essentially a set of practices to help promote a healthy and good night's sleep. So the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation, they outlined 6 strategies that they have found based on the evidence and the research that's out there to be the most helpful with achieving good sleep hygiene. So we'll go through those 6 strategies for strengthening those habits. So the first strategy is to go to bed only when sleepy. So you don't want to delay sleep, or else this will strengthen that association between your bed and not sleeping, or that feeling of insomnia. So if you're going to bed and you're not even sleepy, you're just going to lay in bed in this wakeful state, which will just strengthen that association, which is the thing that we don't want. And there is a difference between feeling sleepy and feeling tired. So I've heard, clients say a lot, oh, I'm so like, I get so tired and I'm so exhausted by the end of the day, but I just can't sleep. And so you want to be attentive to the signs of sleepiness, and that's your indicator to when it's time to go to bed. So you're yawning and you have that heavy sensation in the eyelids, or maybe you're having itchy or watery eyes. Those are your signs indicating to you that, okay, it's time for bed, it's time for me to sleep. So that's the first thing. You only want to go to bed when you're actually feeling sleepy. The second strategy is to set aside at least 1 hour before bedtime for rest and relaxation. So that 1 hour before bedtime, so let's say bedtime is at 10, from 9 to 10, you want to avoid any sources of cognitive and emotional activation that can delay sleep. So you want to avoid work, you want to avoid responding to emails. You also want to avoid physical exercise. If those are things that you need to get done, make sure you reserve specific time for all of that earlier in the evening, not in that 1 hour before bed. So instead, in that 1 hour before bed, what you want to do is try activities that promote transition from wakefulness to sleepiness to sleep. So you can listen to music, you can do some light reading, you can practice some mindfulness. Again, be wary of the content, right? So because sometimes music can be emotionally charged, or if you're reading something that's emotionally charged or that's causing you stress, you want to avoid any content related to that. So be very mindful of what it is you're listening to and what it is that you're going to be reading before you go to bed. And you want to establish a bedtime routine, because that's just, again, indicating to your body that it's time. I'm getting ready for bed and I'm going to eventually transition to sleep. And so for some people, what they do in that hour is they take a bath, they brush their teeth, they wash their face, they change into their sleepwear, and then they get into bed and they do some light reading, or they listen to music, or they listen to a relaxation meditation, and that all of that falls into that 1 hour before bed. Now, I will say the thing with taking a bath or a shower, there is science behind getting into the shower, taking a hot bath or taking a hot shower, and then having this temperature drop when you get out, because that activates the melatonin hormone, which is the sleep hormone. So a lot of the time, I've heard clients, and for me, myself, actually, I do tend to feel very sleepy after I take a shower. And that's usually one of the last things I do before bed, because you do experience, after that temperature drop, there is an increase in that release of melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, and that helps induce you to sleep. Strategy number 3. So if you're unable to fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, you want to get out of bed. So again, you want to break that association between bed and insomnia. Because if you're laying in bed beyond that 20 minutes, that's your body and that's your mind telling you that, okay, this bed is for when I stay awake. It's not for sleep anymore. And we want to avoid that. So after 15, 20 minutes, if you're not able to get to sleep, you want to get out of your room, go to a different room if possible, and participate in some light reading or writing or listening to music or doing a word search. Again, nothing too cognitively or emotionally or physically demanding. And you want to avoid any electronic devices, physical exercises. Again, people often, they'll go on their phone or they'll watch something on TV. You want to try to avoid that. It actually comes back to the melatonin hormone, because especially with screens, as you're looking at a screen, it depletes the level of melatonin. And when you're trying to go to bed and when it's time for sleep, you want to see an increase in those melatonin levels. So if you go on your phone or if you watch TV right before bed, it's preventing that release of melatonin. So strategy number 4 is you want to get up at the same time each morning, and this is even on weekends. And this is regardless of how much sleep you got. So again, you're trying to build this habit in your body and in your mind of creating this sort of sleep schedule and sleep habit, and that includes what time you get up. So you want, to set an alarm that's loud enough to get you up. Maybe try placing the alarm clock far away so that you have to get up to turn it off. But the important thing is that you get up at that time, regardless of how tired you are, regardless of how much sleep you got. And then number 5 is you want to reserve the bed for only sleep and sexual activity. So you do want to avoid watching TV or using your phone, eating, working, planning, worrying in bed. I know I think that's something very common for a lot of us, to go to bed worrying about the next day or worrying about, what we need to do for the week. But you want to, again, the main association you want to create between yourself and your bed is sleepiness. Now, quick, note about falling asleep to TV and music. You want to try to avoid falling asleep to it, because the sound of it still playing as you've fallen asleep, the brain will continue to pay attention to the stimuli. And so that will result in a lighter sleep and a lower quality sleep. So I know I said, in the hour before bed, you can listen to music, but what you want to try though is put on a timer of some sort where it will shut off after some time. So you're not falling asleep and the music just continues to play. And the last one here is that you want to limit naps during the day, because that will just impact your sleep later at night. But that's a general rule. If you are going to nap, you want to take them early in the afternoon. So it's not on the slide, but it's generally before 3 p.m. that you want to take that nap, and you want to limit them to 15 to 30 minutes. So generally you want to avoid naps, but if you are going to take a nap, limit them to 15 to 30 minutes and keep them, make sure they're before 3 p.m. And you want to also make sure that you nap wherever you will sleep at night. So if the bed in your bedroom is where you sleep at night, that's where you want to take your nap as well. So you want to avoid the couch or the recliner in the living area, because again, it all comes back to strengthening the association between your bed and sleep. So the main takeaways for today is, or what I want you to remember is fatigue is a very common persistent symptom of concussion. Like I said, it can persist as long as 5 years from post-injury. It's important to remember that there are a number of factors that can contribute to your fatigue throughout the day. So you want to be wary of that. So think about your environment, think about what medications you're on, think about, what time of day you work best, because those are all factors that you need to be aware of as you engage in your activities. One of the ways to help manage fatigue is to pace and plan your activities and also implement appropriate rest breaks throughout the day. You want to schedule those rest breaks. Don't just tell yourself, okay, I'll take it whenever I need it. Try to be proactive with it and actually slot it into your schedule or your agenda, however you keep track of your activities or your phone calendar. You also want to be aware of your tolerances and triggers for fatigue to help manage your day. Like I said, everybody has different tolerances, everybody has different triggers. So it's important that either you build that awareness or you work with someone who can help you build that awareness. And finally, you want to follow good sleep hygiene practices because that will go a long way with helping you manage your fatigue. And it can even just help rule out some of the factors that might be playing into why you're feeling so tired. If you can get your sleep in check, then we can, think about the other factors that are at play and how we can manage those. And then the last thing here I want to leave you with is just something I found. I found this visual. It was on Instagram. The handle at the bottom is there at New Happy Co. And I saw it and I thought about, obviously we're in very extenuating circumstances with the pandemic. It's, we're approaching the 2-year mark with that. And I saw this because I was thinking about myself and I was thinking about, clients that I've worked with post brain injury, and it really resonated. And I wanted to share this with you guys. So if we think about on the left-hand side here, so an event that wouldn't bother you in normal times, it would just be, like a speck on the wall, not a big deal. That same event after a year of a pandemic can feel more intense, right? And then we can think about maybe just a typical daily stressor in normal times, right? Maybe you got into a little fight with someone or you have a report due, and this is the sort of level of intensity that you feel. That same stressor after the year of pandemic feels like this. And it's grown quite a bit after a year of pandemic. Then we get to a major challenge in normal times. So, maybe loss of a job, loss of a loved one, a divorce. It can feel like this. That same challenge after a year of a pandemic feels exponentially worse. Now, for someone, for those of you here, whether you sustained your concussion, before the pandemic or during the pandemic, the recovery has been happening during the pandemic. And so when I saw this, I thought about, okay, this visual was made for someone, for the average, population. But if we think about someone after a brain injury, the load becomes so much more. So that same event after a year of pandemic, after a brain injury, on top of a pandemic feels like this. A stressor during normal times after a year of pandemic, on top of a brain injury feels like this. And then a major challenge in normal times after a year of a pandemic, on top of a brain injury feels like a big boulder. And so I just wanted to share this with you guys to let you know that, whatever it is that you're going through on top of the recovery, going through the recovery process with concussion is extremely challenging. It can be very extremely challenging, but to have to go through that during a pandemic when, it may be hard to access resources and get help. It can feel exponentially worse. And I just hope, this presentation was helpful for you, and this whole series will be helpful for you to seek the support that you need, or to really get some good takeaways from these presentations. So thank you so much for attending today. I think we should have time for questions. I think, are they in the Q&A? If people have.
And if it's easier for you to ask your question out loud, we can even unmute you if that makes it easier.
Yeah.
Oops. I see a hand up. Let me just go and find. So I have one comment just before I go to the hands up. One of the members said that they really liked your visuals.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the last one, I have to give credit to that, the Instagram post I found. That's a good one.
Yes. Okay, so I have one person with their hands up. I'm going to, oh, you know what, you're unmuted. If you want, you can go ahead and speak.
Thank you for the presentation. That was really helpful. I just wanted to know, well, research states that fatigue, can stay until 5 years after a brain injury. Can that be different for some people? Could it be longer and for some shorter?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've read, so at the 3-month mark, usually that's about 30% of people after a concussion, they still experience fatigue. 30% of people post-concussion still experience fatigue at the 3-month mark. And that if you're still experiencing fatigue at the 3-month mark, that's usually the indicator that it's going to be prolonged, at least until the 6-month mark, and for some people, the 5-year mark. 5-year mark is just what I think really the sort of the more long-term evidence has shown, but it can certainly be shorter or unfortunately longer for some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does
But it is, yeah.
Sorry, you can go on.
No, I was just going to say, like, from the experience I've had with clients, fatigue is often probably the #1 persistent symptom, like the most prolonged, that people have at least expressed to me.
Right. No, it's absolutely true. I also wanted to know, like if you've had multiple concussions, is the fatigue likely to stay on longer?
Yes, so there are a number of factors that contribute to persistent symptoms after a concussion. So including fatigue as being one of the symptoms that would be prolonged. One of the factors is multiple concussions. Another factor actually for the women in this group is gender. If you're a woman, you're twice as likely to have prolonged symptoms compared to men. And the reason behind, they're still kind of figuring that out. Some people, some research has shown that it's hormonal. Others have said that it's related to the neck, because women tend to have weaker neck musculature, which can impact the level of whiplash that you would experience during a concussion. So going back to the factors, yes, multiple concussions, gender, and previous sort of mental health concerns. If you had diagnoses of anxiety, depression prior to your concussion, that's often a factor and a precursor to having prolonged symptoms.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I have another question, and this might be my last one.
Yeah.
If you have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder as a result of your concussion,
Mhm.
does that also prolong your recovery?
Yes, it can. And that goes back to um, if you remember the cycle that I went through where you have fatigue and you have stress and depression. And so because one of the symptoms of depression, so if that's especially if that is one of the disorders that you've been diagnosed with, that in itself can prolong ongoing symptoms of fatigue and also cognitive dysfunction, because that's another symptom of depression where you have difficulties with your cognitive functioning. And so it has this sort of dual effect where your mental health condition is contributing to those symptoms, but also your concussion. And so there's this sort of exacerbation that's going on and can certainly prolong your recovery. So that's
Right,
why, it's really important to get sort of that multidisciplinary sort of treatment where you're seeking counseling to help address the mental health condition, but also seeking services for ongoing concussion recovery.
right. And this last question, sorry, it just occurred to me, and I just want others to have the opportunity to speak to. I don't know if you can answer this question, but usually depression and anxiety are usually the common mental disorders associated with
Yeah.
concussions, or usually, generally speaking, that's what the population has. But is there any link between sort of like delusions or psychosis related to concussion?
I haven't. I don't know if I can answer that
Okay.
with my knowledge, but I can reaffirm that yes, depression and anxiety is commonly diagnosed following a concussion, especially when you've had persistent symptoms. And a lot of that, comes with the ongoing frustration of the recovery process and leading to this sort of state of depression and anxiety. The psychosis, that I'm not too sure about.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
One of our members starts by thanking you for the presentation, and they're asking if you have any activities like pottery or painting.
Oh, like at our clinic?
I'm going to wait for them to respond in the
Or,
chat box, but that's my assumption. Yes.
oh, through our clinic. No, we don't do any sort of like activity based. I mean, it's something we would incorporate as part of therapy, if that's what you're asking about, but it's not something that we would offer like on a consistent basis, or at best, oh, or through you guys, I guess, too, if you offer.
So right now, most of our programs, I'll just quickly go over this because we're just in the middle of webinar, but at best everything is kind of virtual right now, but in normal times, we do have some art that will be rolling out as soon as we get the go ahead. And we're just waiting for a few plans in.
And actually, if I can make a suggestion,
Sure.
just in terms of resources, especially free resources, because we all love free. If you check out, like your local library, I know through the Markham Public Library, they have virtual programming every week for so many different topics, like whatever you're interested in. They do art, there's music, there's, again, it's all virtual, but they also have educational sort of workshops and seminars where there's like financial literacy workshops, or learning English, or all sorts of things. And they also do yoga on the weekends, and it's all free. And you don't have to be a Markham resident. Like I've signed up some of my clients for these workshops, especially the yoga on the weekends. And so if you just go through the Markham Public Library website, you can scroll through the different activities that they have, or check out your local library. If you're in the Durham region or the Toronto region, I'm sure they have stuff going on as well. but I know for sure because I've gone through the Markham Library, they just seem to be, I don't know, they seem to have a lot of resources that you can access without even being a resident.
I'm just putting the website in the chat box for the BIST calendar. We do have a few things that are going on currently. If you want, you can chat with me at a different time. I'm also going to put my email address in the chat box, and we can go over some of the programs that BIST also has to offer. I have a comment from one of our members thanking you for the presentation and for the chat at the end. There we go. So that's my email address. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unmute you.
Hi. I was gonna comment, it was a really good presentation and really good to understand. A comment I was going to put out there was that people with sleep problems, like I'm about almost 5 years, I still have insomnia, but one of the things that the neurologist and a neuropsychiatrist did pretty quick after talking to me was send me for a sleep study. And it turned out for me that I also had severe sleep apnea. So that's one thing that I guess they look at, because if you're not getting proper oxygen to your brain and not breathing properly, and your sleep is disrupted a lot, that could be one of the things. So talking to a doctor or getting a referral for one may be helpful. So that was one thing that was a way to help tackle, and then like the sleep. And then also for me, things like melatonin I try, or magnesium, sometimes those calm drinks and things like that. Like, I know everybody needs to check with their doctors and make sure it's not a problem with medications and things like that, but sometimes other helpful aids or that you can do to try to sleep are helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Lori.
Yeah, no problem. And I had one question too, is like, I'm still struggling with the hitting walls and stuff like that, and the that chart where you had the ups and downs kind of a thing. I'm still like struggling with that, but it's hard because sometimes there's things that you do that you don't know how much energy you're gonna have. So I think I guess gotta go easy and pace it out still, but it's hard to know.
It is. It's a lot of it is trial and error. And you know, you won't, like you said, you won't know until you do it and see how much you can push yourself. And it also depends on, you know, what else you have going on during the day. Maybe you didn't get a good sleep that night, or maybe you're feeling particularly stressed that day, and so your tolerance is lower. So there's just so many factors that are in play, which is why it's good to maybe like keep an activity schedule of what you've been up to that day, and keeping track of your symptoms and what your tolerances have been, to help you build that awareness.
True, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who is bringing their questions to Ayushi. And you can share any of your comments or questions either by writing in the Q&A box, the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you.
Is it just going to be the video that's available, or would you like me to send a copy of the slides?
You know, the slides would be fabulous if you don't mind. And then if there is somebody who would like me to email out these slides, you can, again, my email is right there, connections@bist.ca, and I can email them out to you if that's something that is easier for you. Thank you for that, Ayushi.
Yeah, I'm happy to send them over. Sometimes it's easier to just like do a quick swift through versus watching the whole hour.
Yeah, even just kind of keeping those, main points
Yeah.
sometimes is easier. What I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to, yes. For people who are tuning in after, we're just reading a comment from one of the members that says the little brain on the bike is cute. And yes, it was. So I'm going to stop recording at this time, just because I'm mindful of how long we're running, but we can continue this discussion. But I just want to formally thank Brianna for coming in, and on behalf of the PIA, thank you so much, Brianna. It was lovely to meet you.
It was great to listen to Ayushi's presentation. I learned a lot myself about sleep hygiene, so I'll have to incorporate some of that.
Yes, exactly. And thank you, Ayushi, for coming out and bringing such an incredibly formative presentation for all of us. I also, too, I was kind of making little notes and realizing that I have very poor sleep hygiene.
I think
I
we
will
all
be taking notes.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like such a hypocrite because I say all this, but half of them I'm not doing.
I think it's our society, I think,
Yeah.
it's very challenging to
It
have
is.
those really great proper sleeps.
Mhm.
So for now, I'm just going to say goodbye. And for next week, make sure that you come on in and again, have your questions ready. Next week, we will be looking at advocacy with Colleen Worsley. So go ahead and register for that. And if you need any help, you can connect with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Bye.
Have a great night.